In this very in-depth forecast, the Midwest is being monitored for a tornado outbreak where linear storms are expected to bring multiple strong to potentially violent long-track tornadoes, widespread violent wind gust swaths upwards of 90 miles per hour, and widespread massive hail upwards of softballs are expected. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator in-depth weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 21st of 2024. For today we have a moderate risk for the Midwest, for Iowa, northern Missouri, northwestern Iowa, southwestern Wisconsin, and southeastern Minnesota. Risks for today do include a 15% tornado risk for the moderate risk region. This is going to be one of the primary risks for today, as we could see the potential for multiple long track and potentially strong to even violent tornadoes across this region. Strong tornadoes are expected, violent tornadoes are possible, and they are definitely going to be possibly long tracked across this region. If you do live in the affected region, please stay weather alert for the time being. There is already a PDS tornado watch out, and storms are currently already developing, so please take any storms across this region. If you live in the affected region, please take them seriously. For a damaging wind risk, we do have a 45% risk for damaging winds, where we are expected to see widespread and violent damaging wind gusts across this region. As for our hail risk, we do have a 45% for Iowa into northern Missouri, where we are expected to see widespread massive hailstones greater than potentially reaching upwards of softball size across this region, which are really big. We are definitely expected to see some really widespread significant impacts that are going to come with these storms. Again, that includes the possibility of multiple strong to even violent tornadoes, widespread damaging wind gusts upwards of 90 miles per hour, and very widespread and very large hail across this region that will be damaging. We also do have another marginal risk for the Midwest, for the New England corridor that I didn't even notice there, with the primary risks being an isolated severe wind gust, and the possibility for some isolated large hail. For our day 2 outlook, we do have a enhanced risk for the southern central plains in the Mississippi River Valley, for northern Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, southern Missouri, where we are expected to see a 5% tornado risk, where we could see the potential for a couple of tornadoes, as well as a 2% tornado risk for northeastern Pennsylvania, in the proximity of Erie, Pennsylvania, there along Lake Erie. Where we could see the potential for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes. We do have a 30% damaging wind risk, which is the primary driving risk for the enhanced risk region for tomorrow, where we could see some widespread damaging wind gusts, as well as a 30% hail risk, where we are expected to see widespread hailstones that could definitely be really large with that hash area. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the Central Plains and into the Mississippi River Valley and the Southern Central Plains for Kansas, Oklahoma, northern Texas, northern Louisiana, and Arkansas and southwestern Missouri, where we could see the potential of some upcoming severe thunderstorms, some upcoming scattered severe thunderstorms, as well as the potential for some severe thunderstorms along the coastline here of the eastern seaboard across the New England corridor, extending from Maine into Virginia. For day 4, day 8 outlook, we currently have a day 5, 15% for southeastern Oklahoma, northern Texas into Arkansas, where we could see some upcoming significant severe thunderstorms. We also have a day 6, 15% for some of the Ohio River Valley back into the Mississippi River Valley for southern Missouri, Arkansas, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and southern Indiana. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today, we have a slight risk for Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, into portions of eastern South Dakota and Iowa, where we are expected to see the possibility for some scattered flash flooding, with a marginal risk that extends across Illinois, Missouri, northern Arkansas, even back into Oklahoma. For day 2 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the Mississippi River Valley, for southeastern Oklahoma, northeastern Texas, Arkansas, southern Missouri, into portions of western Kentucky and western Tennessee. For day 3 outlook, we have another slight risk for that same general location. It's a little bit smaller, but we could still see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. We also do have a marginal risk for portions of the Midwest into the northern central plains for South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, portions of western Wisconsin, and southeastern South Dakota or North Dakota, where we could see the potential for some isolated flash flooding. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to indicate our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Starting off with our upper air pattern, as of right now, we do have a extremely powerful 500 millibar jet. As of right now, we do have an extremely powerful 500 millibar jet that is currently working its way into this region with 500 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 80 to potentially 90 miles per hour across this region. This is going to continue to move into this region and continuously feed into this region, and could potentially even strengthen and maybe begin approaching 100 miles per hour in some regions, mainly across northern Missouri and southern Iowa there. But still, regardless, very, very strong flow is associated with this trough and will definitely be a massive support and support very large amounts of lift across this region, and will be able to support our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. As far as your surface observation goes, I'm not really sure what's going on with this warm front or the stationary front. This should already be pushed up all the way up to southern Minnesota by now, but we do have a cold front that is slowly working its way in with a low pressure system, a surface low that is located around southwestern Minnesota and southeastern South Dakota, and this cold front will trigger our severe thunderstorms with support from our 500 millibar trough ahead of that and our extremely strong 500 millibar jet streak. And with how strong 500 millibar flow is, we are definitely expected to see some really powerful shear across this region, and definitely a pretty big risk for the potential for some large hail across this region. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low-level jet and how that's expected to affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see an extremely powerful low-level jet as expected with this risk for severe thunderstorms and this potential for tornadoes. The low-level jet is continuing to strengthen, but as storms continue to move into the moderate risk region in the 15% tornado risk, we are expected to see the low-level jet continue to strengthen to speeds at 850 millibars that could potentially reach upwards of 50 to maybe even 60 miles per hour, which will support some strong directional shear across this region and definitely support the risk for severe thunderstorms and mainly the potential for tornadoes across this region. The low-level jet is expected to continue to strengthen, especially around the magic hour when the sun begins to set, with it potentially strengthening upwards of 70 miles per hour. However, this will also be when instability begins to decrease as we lose surface heating and storms exit the moderate risk region. We could continue to see the low-level jet continue to increase to strengths upwards of 70 to potentially even 80 miles per hour in some regions, which will support even stronger directional shear. And I think that the best risk for tornadoes will probably be around here in eastern Iowa, where the low-level jet strengthens to its maximum, or doesn't just get quite to its maximum. It does get really close to its maximum, but it's also before we lose that surface heating and we lose our strong instability. But our low-level jet will be at its strongest with that good instability overlap, and that's why I think eastern Iowa has the best chance for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 200 millibar winds and how that's going to affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms with our defluence as well as our flow at our 200 millibars, and how that's going to affect our speed shear and our risk for hail across this region. We are expected to see very, very prominent and very, very noticeable defluence across this region, with the main void being around northern Missouri there into southeastern Iowa. Very, very noticeable spreading of our wind vectors at our 200 millibars. That will definitely support a pretty large void, pretty deep void in the upper levels, the extreme upper levels of our atmosphere. And what that will do is, if we have a void in the upper levels of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is a gas, as you all know, because we're not swimming right now, we are going to see our mid levels and our low levels have to compensate for that void in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So what that will do is that will take air from our mid levels and our upper levels. That will all rise up to try and fill that void in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that will support very, very widespread and very strong lift across this region and be an extreme aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms overall. As far as our flow at 200 millibars, we don't really have too terribly strong flow at 200 millibars, so not really anything too crazy at our 200 millibars. We could see a little bit weaker speed shear as a result. However, with the extreme amount of flow that we have at our 500 millibars, that will definitely be able to compensate for the lack of strong flow at 200 millibars with the amount of shear flow at our 500 millibars. It's still absolutely insane to me to see 500 millibar winds that strong. Taking a look at our storm relative helicity and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes overall. As of right now, we do have some weaker storm relative helicity values, upwards of 200 at our 0 to 3 kilometer, which is still very sufficient for the potential of strong tornadoes across this region. It is definitely a little bit more on the modest side of things. However, regardless, we'll still be able to support our risk for tornadoes and potentially strong tornadoes as well. We are expected to see a continuous strengthening of our storm relative helicity as storms continue to progress eastward and our low-level jet continues to strengthen with storm relative helicity values that could potentially approach upwards of 300 and even 400 in eastern Iowa as our low-level jet gets just before increasing to its maximum. That is definitely some really strong storm relative helicity values and very, very supportive and indicative of the potential of severe thunderstorms or the potential of tornadoes across this region, including the possibility of strong tornadoes and the potential for violent tornadoes as well. That is definitely still on the table as a result of this very, very strong storm relative helicity across this region. And that's why, again, I say that the best risk for tornadoes will probably be around eastern Iowa when we have weaker instability values as the sun begins to set and we lose that strong surface heating, but our low-level jet continues to strengthen with that broader temperature gradient because the sun is setting and it's getting a little bit cooler. So there is a much broader temperature gradient, allowing for stronger winds aloft and a stronger low-level jet and stronger storm relative helicity values in turn. And again, where that overlaps will definitely have the biggest risk for tornadoes. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to indicate our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to start off with some pretty strong bulk shear values across this region in the 45% risk for hail, with bulk shear values that are going to be backing our storms reaching upwards of 70 knots, the upper 70 knots backing our storms of bulk shear. That is definitely going to be more than sufficient in supporting the risk for massive hailstones across this region. Again, upwards of softball size is possible across this region, and again, we'll definitely support some very widespread and massive hailstones with our storms. We are expected to see this continue up until storms exit our 45% risk for large hail, where we have a little bit weaker bulk shear values, but still sufficient for the potential of some massive hailstones and very widespread hailstones as well. A very widespread massive hail definitely won't be as widespread as it exits the 45% risk for large hail. And we lose a little bit of that bulk shear. We do have weaker bulk shear values as storms exit that 45% risk for large hail, but still, regardless, in that 45% risk for large hail will be the greatest risk for large hail, as you can probably already tell by the fact that it has a higher probability for hail comparative to the rest of the 30% risk for large hail. But as storms exit into eastern Iowa, they will lose a little bit of that bulk shear. There won't be as greater bulk shear values, won't be as much speed shear, and there won't be as great of a risk for large hail, but still large hail, very widespread large hail is still expected. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and our simulated radar, so we can go over some general radar analysis and some timing for our storms. Let's start off with our general radar analysis because I tend to be better with that than our timing. What we are seeing from our composite reflectivity is that storms are expected to take on a little bit more of a linear mode. With what storms are exhibiting right now, definitely indicates more of a linear mode. However, models since the morning have been trending towards a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode, which I don't think is going to happen because of what storms have already showed us. They definitely show much more of a linear mode than really all that much of a semi-discrete mode, which will be overall more favorable to the potential of strong damaging wind gusts, but will still be able to support embedded, strong, and potentially even violent tornadoes in multiple of them as well. Again, even if this does become more of a linear mode, the tornado risk is still not ruled out, and the damaging wind risk will still be there, and definitely that is still a big playing factor in our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. But our composite reflectivity does indicate a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode. Further down to the south, where we don't have as much forcing along the cold front, we could definitely see a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode, and potentially even a discrete mode further down to the south that may extend down into Missouri and Oklahoma. That could potentially develop into more of a messier mode later on. Don't think that this is going to really develop into an MCV, but we could see some more messy storms later on in Missouri and further down to the south. And I definitely think that we are probably going to see a little bit more of a linear mode across this region. And our bulk shear vectors, our vectors for our flow aloft definitely indicate a little bit more of a linear mode being possible, with a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode being possible as well on top of that linear mode. However, with the forcing along the cold front, the strong amount of forcing, and what we're currently already seeing from our storms, I doubt that we'll see too much of a semi-discrete mode. We could also see the potential for some prefrontal storms that could develop. I do know that a lot of models have been indicating the possibility of a couple semi-discrete storms firing off ahead of our cold front. We will definitely have to monitor that, as if we can get semi-discrete cells firing ahead of our cold front in the open warm sector, that could definitely be a big tornado risk there for eastern Iowa. So we will definitely have to watch that to see if those prefrontal storms actually do develop. So definitely make sure to be on the lookout for that, for those prefrontal storms. Even regardless, still be on the lookout for that powerful line of storms. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see very large amounts of moisture across this region with some really high dew point values, with dew points that are expected to get upwards of the upper 60s and the very widespread low 70s across this region will support insane amounts of instability across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability on top of our dew points, we are expected to see much more modest temperature values across this region, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the mid to upper 70s across this region, and even the low 80s could potentially approach the mid 80s further to the east in eastern Iowa and Illinois. It's definitely going to be much more hotter further off to the east, with some more modest temperature values across this region, but definitely not too modest. We definitely have quite a lot of heat across this region. We'll still be able to support very large amounts of instability and be very sufficient in fueling our severe thunderstorms across this region, especially on top of our very widespread 70 dew points. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see some pretty strong lapse rate values across this region, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the low 8s and the mid and upper 7s across this region, which will be a massive aid for our instability overall and support more organized severe thunderstorms, and also definitely be a massive aid in our hail risk as well. Is what this will do for our hail risk with stronger lapse rates. We have an expanded layer for hail development, which will allow for a strong updraft to suspend hail and rain particles in the freezing layer for much longer periods of time. And with some pretty strong bulk shear values, we could definitely see our hail sizes get to some pretty big sizes. Again, upwards of softball sizes are possible across this region. Our lapse rates will also allow for mixing of winds from our from aloft down to the surface, which will support some strong damaging wind gusts across this region. Again, upwards of 90 miles per hour is possible. And this will also definitely support very large amounts of instability on top of our strong 70 dew points and our pretty hot temperatures across this region. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and our convective inhibition, and how that's going to affect our instability and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms. As of right now, the cap has fully broken as storms are already ongoing, but we have some really strong warm air advection from the southwest. And with that elevated mixed layer in place, that has led to overall much more explosive severe thunderstorms by the time that elevated mixed layer has broken, as that definitely led to a pretty thick cap across this region. And by the time that does break, it will do the soda bottle cap effect, as I like to call it, and make storms overall more explosive across this region. And that will allow for instability to build underneath that cap. But now that the cap has already broken, storms can use up that instability that built underneath that cap at the surface. With the amount of strong instability that we are expected to see, which we will look at later, it doesn't really look like that cap is expected to be put back in place by the time the sun sets. By the time that cap breaks, it does look like it's going to stay broken. It won't really be able to be put back in place, which isn't really a good thing. I do know that models a day or two previously were indicating a much thicker cap for much longer across this region, just immediately to the east of our storms, that has since basically gone away, which will definitely not really inhibit our storms as much as previously anticipated 2 to 3 days out, and is definitely a little bit more of a scary sign to see. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our instability overall and our risk for severe thunderstorms. As of right now, we do have a clearing that is currently working its way into southern Iowa and northern Missouri. We do have a little bit of cloud cover further off to the east into northeastern Missouri and southeastern Iowa. This is definitely a very scary look, with a little bit of cloud cover ahead that will prevent any sort of over mixing. But by the time that clearing moves in and we get that surface heating from that clearing, we are expected to see a massive uptick in our instability. We also have a very prominent cumulus field just ahead of our storms that are currently ongoing, and that is already indicating very large amounts of instability across this region, the lack of a cap, and the fact that warm air is able to rise. Whenever we have a cumulus field like this, it mainly indicates the fact that the cap is broken and warm air is able to rise to form those cumulus clouds, and instability is in place to form those cumulus clouds as well. So definitely a little bit more of a scary sign in that clearing there. And that clearing will continue to work its way up into Iowa over the next couple of hours and introduce more surface heating and uptick that instability quite a lot. Taking a look at our cape and how that's going to fuel our severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see very strong instability across this region. Definitely not as strong because we do have a little bit more modest temperatures across this region, but definitely some really strong amounts of instability, and that clearing that is currently working its way in will also definitely be a massive aid, with instability that is expected to get upwards of the mid 3000s across this entire region. That is expected to weaken down as storms move into eastern Iowa, into the low to mid 2000s into eastern Iowa, which is still going to be sufficient for my hypothesis and sufficient for fueling the potential for strong to potentially violent tornadoes, where that low level jet is expected to substantially increase, and instability will continue to decrease as storms move into northwestern Illinois. But as storms move into central and eastern Iowa, again, those are the areas that will have the highest tornado potential, as more than sufficient instability will be able to fuel the potential for strong embedded tornadoes and the possibility for violent tornadoes as well. This will also be able to fuel our various risks as well, including the possibility of widespread massive hailstones and the potential for some widespread, very strong damaging wind gusts across this region. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this, other than the fact that the majority of our surface-based cape is expected to translate down to our surface as well, which is going to allow for surface-based storms and allow for surface-based rotation and the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms and fueling those severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see some moderately strong to some pretty strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that are going to be ahead of our storms in the warm sector. This strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability will definitely be a massive aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms, especially at the surface, and with any surface vorticity along the cold front, which is definitely going to be expected with a pretty decent wind shift, with winds that are going to be backing our cold front out of the west and winds that are going to be pushing out of the south to the east of our cold front. We'll definitely see a lot of surface vorticity that's going to develop along that cold front, and with some very strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability, that will definitely be able to use that surface vorticity, and we'll definitely be able to create a pretty big bullseye for our cheat code, and definitely be a pretty big aiding factor in our risk for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate our potential for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some really high energy helicity index values across this region, with energy helicity index values that are expected to reach upwards of 5 to 4, very widespread across this region. Any areas where you're seeing some locally higher circles of energy helicity index values, that is a mesocyclone that is being simulated by our models as a result of our very conducive environment. And with this very conducive environment, with some pretty strong instability, definitely a little bit more on the modest side of things as a result of that weaker temperature at the surface, still very big overlap for ingredients for tornadoes, and definitely very supportive of the potential for multiple strong tornadoes, including the possibility of significant tornadoes across this region. And again, those tornadoes could definitely be long track. Taking a look at our significant tornado parameter and how that's going to indicate the potential for significant tornadoes across this region, we have some really high significant tornado parameter values across the moderate risk region as well, with significant tornado parameter values that are reaching upwards of 3 to potentially even 4, maybe even approaching 5 in some regions. Again, definitely very indicative of the potential for significant tornadoes and even violent tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, we are expected to see very widespread damaging wind gusts and the potential for significant damaging wind gusts as well. It's definitely not as big of a risk for damaging wind gusts, I would say, and we should definitely shouldn't see as strong damaging wind gusts as what happened. I think that was on Monday or Saturday. I honestly don't remember when that derecho hit Kansas. It's kind of just been a blur to me the last couple of days because of my finals for school. But I definitely don't think that we are expected to see as big of a risk for tornadoes, damaging wind gusts. I definitely don't think that we're going to see as strong damaging wind gusts across this region as we did a couple days ago in Kansas, but we still are expected to see significant damaging wind gusts that could definitely range anywhere from 70 miles per hour, that could even reach 90 miles per hour in some regions. Maybe a local 100 mile per hour, maybe possible. However, that would probably be a result of some rare mesoscale events. But more meteorologically, I definitely think that we are expected to see weaker damaging wind gusts, but still very, very strong damaging wind gusts that could still potentially reach upwards of 70 to even 90 miles per hour across this region. We will look at another special model. It will be our derecho composite when we look at our meso-analysis, because I do know that a couple of people have been throwing around the D word. I haven't been throwing around the D word. I do mean derecho. Derecho is the D word, is what I'm talking about. Some people have been wanting to call this a derecho, and we will look at our derecho composite to see how that compares. Taking a look at the meso-analysis page for our various hail parameters, as of right now, we do have some higher hail parameters further down in the south than actually previously anticipated, with a 32 that extends from southeastern Kansas into northern and central Oklahoma. For our significant hail, we do have a I think that's a 5 right there. For our storms that are currently progressing through the 45% risk for large hail, definitely indicating the potential for some significant hail. For our SARS hail size, we have very, very broad 4-inch hail sizes across this region. Again, very indicative of some massive hailstones. Again, softball sizes are possible across this region. And then for our SAR significant hail percentage, we do have upwards of 90% for the vast majority of this region, 80s and 90%, indicating a near 100% risk for some significant hail across this region. And then for our significant derecho, not significant, but derecho parameter, I do want to take a look at this because I do know that the D word was thrown around a little bit. We do have upwards of 14 and 12, very high derecho parameter values across this region. Definitely could see some pretty strong, very strong damaging wind gusts across this region, upwards of 90 miles per hour. Again, it is possible. I don't know if this will be up to caliber with a derecho, but we definitely have our ingredients in place for some pretty strong damaging wind gusts across this region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. JaxonWX is currently chasing right now. I'm pretty sure he is live on his YouTube channel, so the link to his channels will be in the description if you do want to check that out. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow in another forecast.